I need to submit this final already, so get ready with me. That's exactly what we're going to be doing today. So, disclaimer, I'm a biology major, so please excuse the lack of frames and production. That being said, this presentation will cover 3 segments. The first one being findings within the personal assessments, 2, concepts that I learned throughout the course, and 3, what I can apply to my personal and professional life. So, This Is Me by Rosie Nguyen. Kicking it off with our first assessment, it asks, are you spending too much time online? Where I scored a whopping 88. Now, what does this mean? Well, that score is in range for someone with generalized problematic use. So, yeah, the average person scores a 33 when taking this type of assessment. And honestly, it makes sense. Like, I'm constantly on social media platforms like Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. I will not sleep at night because I'm constantly scrolling on TikTok. Like, my sleep schedule is completely thrown off because I'm spending an extra 2 hours just mindlessly scrolling. Which interestingly brings us to our next assessment, assessing your communication, online and offline disclosure. So for this assessment, it basically assessed 2 things, which were your willingness to disclose something and the depth of intimacy via social networking site versus your willingness to disclose something and the depth of intimacy via face-to-face. Based on my results, my willingness to disclose information and just overall being intimate was lower online than it was face-to-face in person with people. So here I'm going to tie in that concept that I mentioned in the beginning that I learned from the course, and the one that I think really ties into this one is common tendencies and perception, which we saw in chapter 5. Common tendencies and perception is so important because this is how most people would perceive others, thus the common tendency. Many of these are formed off of first impressions, which is why that first impression is always so important. And I feel like through social media, that's basically the first thing that you're hit with. Like, you see somebody's post and you basically think you know their whole life. Being mindful of this while also just considering the nature of the internet and how distant it feels, I'm just less inclined to share more. This ties into our next assessment, which is your listening styles, which I personally scored average and above average for half and half of these categories, which were relational listening, analytical listening, task listening, and critical listening. So a lot of what I scored above average on was more related to empathy skills, where I prioritized listening holistically to the person rather than just focusing on little things. This was an important concept that was explored in Chapter 8, which really put an emphasis on listening, whether it be in the personal or professional development, just because of how it develops connections. Then our next assessment, your method of conflict resolution, where I had a lot of differing scores, and it really just depends on your ability to read a situation and apply a different conflict resolution according to that situation. Chapter 12 went in depth with this concept of conflict styles, but my main takeaway was just how one views a situation and what they're willing to do to solve that situation. Effective communication will approach conflict with one of these styles with all of these factors in mind. The last couple of concepts I'm going to cover that particularly spoke out to me were the self-fulfilling prophecy and fallacies related to self-talk. So the self-fulfilling prophecy is basically when your outlook on something basically manifests itself into the result. This relates a lot to self-talk, which is basically like the voice in your head or even the devil on your shoulder that determines what you're about to do or tries to get you to do something. Negative emotions can really sway the outcome of these decisions, which is why it's so important to try and think more positively, look on the brighter side of life. So for this last segment, I wanted to record myself just to make it more personal because this is a reflection of my personal and professional life. That being said, the first thing I wanted to go over was from our first assessment, and how I can apply this to my life is really just balancing online and real life. So really reducing my screen time to allow myself more time to do those activities and allow myself more time to sleep. The second thing is perception checking. So it's actually really easy for us to form perceptions based off of first impressions, and sometimes this can be really harmful, especially if they're not true. So, how I can apply this to my professional and personal life is to confirm these things, really communicate with the people that these assumptions are based off of, and try to like move in that mindset not to make these kinds of assumptions because we know that they're harmful or can be harmful. So, the fourth and fifth things I wanted to apply to my personal and professional life were the different listening styles and the different conflict styles. So, both of which involve you reading a scenario and choosing a style based on that scenario. So, this is you considering all aspects of that situation in order to best handle it. And I think that's really important when dealing with effective communication. And the last thing that I wanted to apply to my personal and professional life was using these different types of communication in order to develop an overall positive communication style. So, after experiencing this whole course, I definitely developed some new perspective on how to like approach situations. You know, not every solution will give you a definitive answer, but it did give me a new arsenal of different ways to approach a situation. All in all, I think this class was very, very insightful and very helpful for how I approach really the professional setting in the future. Since I'm literally socially inept, I always struggled with that sort of thing. But it gave me just some little things to try out. And I guess that's it.